and welcome back to newsPeeksLIVE. I'm here with Lowell Bergman. I'm Sylvia, and we wanted to talk about what is more difficult to report upon. Is it corporations or is it governments, and what are the difficulties involved?
Well, one of the examples that I give for the difficulty of reporting on corporations is that in my career I've put CIA agents on camera.
Yeah.
Mafioso on camera. But only once in my career was I able to get what is known as a fiduciary officer, that is a top management officer of a publicly traded multinational corporation, to talk in public about what really goes on inside the company. And that caused such a stir that CBS News killed the story and eventually 6 months later ran it because they were embarrassed by the scandal that erupted afterwards.
Yeah.
And there'd only been 2 people like that ever to be public in the United States in 60 years. So if you look at the difference, you can, it's because corporations have a number of ways of keeping people silent. Like when I was working for 60 Minutes, this program at CBS News,
Yeah.
my contract included a clause that said I could never say anything that was negative about the company, basically. It's called a non-disparagement clause. Then it said I was responsible financially if I caused any damage to the company. Okay, and
Any damage, how did they define that?
well, if I said that they were liars and they killed the story, and when they say that, you know, they'll print anything without fear or favor,
Yeah.
but they don't, right?
Yeah.
So if I were to say that in public, they could ostensibly have sued me if it damaged the company. It's really meant for the higher level executives and for the people, at least in the United States, who appear on camera, the stars.
Yeah.
That's why you see very rarely you'll see a news memoir by a well-known person in U.S. television news that says anything negative about the company.
Because it lasts after they've retired.
Oh yeah, it goes on for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And you can't use any of the material that you've learned without their permission.
So they own the material that you
They
use.
own all the footage and so on. They can't stop you. They couldn't. You have a First Amendment right in the United States to say what you want to say,
Yeah.
but you could be sued if it damaged the company who was paying you. So it's much more difficult. And then the world of corporate power and leadership is a pretty small world. So if you're in it, you want to keep making that kind of money, or you want to keep getting jobs. So it's the rare person who will burn all their bridges in that world.
And you lose your whole lifestyle as well. Or,
Right, exactly. So very difficult to find people who would talk about, and not all corporations are the same. So I was dealing, for instance, with a tobacco company,
Yeah.
which had all kinds of serious problems because their product, if used as directed, will kill you.
Yeah.
Right. So they had, but it's similarly, let's say, for a network television operation, their image is worth a lot of money to them.
Yeah.
That's why when you get into the news business on the broadcast side, the person you see on camera in the United States anyway, in the style there, never makes a mistake, always looks like they're the reporter. You never see they never lose an argument. So you're creating this imagery, and they want to defend that. That's worth something to the company.
They never lose an argument.
No, you never saw, in the US, I don't know about in Britain, but you don't see an on-camera person. It's the way it's edited. They act like they know everything, they did the reporting, and they don't. The person on the other side is, if they're arguing with them, it may be a draw, but more often it's the correspondent wins the exchange.
Yeah. So that's the way you describe the corporations. They're very undemocratic, right?
They're not democratic at all. They're not
Yeah.
meant to be.
So, but I mean, they're sort of, now that you get multinational corporations,
No.
like, why are they so tolerated as in a society that will, Western democracies will bomb other countries to spread democracy, but they will allow corporations?
The Europeans created the modern corporation.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah.
as what was called a joint stock company. You know,
Yeah.
that's something that issued stock and people owned pieces of it and you could invest in it. So you guys, and you invented the multinational corporation.
Yep.
Okay, Hudson's Bay Company, for example.
The East
So-
India and yeah.
And East
Yeah.
India Company and so on, right? The Dutch had one as well. So
Yeah.
imperial growth by Europe created the multinational corporation,
Yeah.
usually with very close ties to the government.
Yeah.
And now there are ones that are independent and entities unto themselves. BAE is one which now does, I think, most of its business in the United States, but it's a major multinational British corporation.
Yeah. It's just weird how they're so tolerated, isn't it?
Well, they're not tolerated.
Because
They're part of the backbone of the economy
yeah.
and the way the economy is organized
Yeah.
in these Western democratic countries.
Yes.
That's the model.
Yeah. So when you're reporting on them, it's so much more difficult to report on a corporation than on a government, no?
Except, well, you can report on them. You know, there's a difference between stenography and journalism. Much of the business press takes the press releases of the corporations, or if they have to file documents with a regulator, right?
Yeah.
In the U.S., it would be the Securities and Exchange Commission for publicly traded stock,
Yeah.
right? So they report on those documents when they're filed, or they report press releases, or there are two major sections in the old-fashioned newspaper. One was the sports pages, right, which was bigger than anything else, and then was business after that. And that's because people's interests are in those things. But doing critical reporting about major companies immediately runs into the problem that, one, you may create damage to that company.
Yeah.
And in Britain or the United States, you could be sued for creating damage, unless you can show that it's true and prove it.
Right.
And then what's the standard of proof? So to a publisher, those kinds of stories are, generally speaking, a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
And unless they have some agenda that includes publishing whatever information that they think is reliable and that the public needs to know it, and they're willing to risk it when it's not positive information, they'll fold. You know, they'll sell as many copies whether they do that article or not, depending upon what the market's like.
Yeah. So when it comes to reporting, a very important tool for you would be whistleblowers.
Whistleblowers, well, it depends. I mean, someone may think they're a whistleblower, that is, that they've seen something that's wrong and they're reporting it.
Yeah.
And they want to go public because the company won't do anything about it if they went to the company or they went to the government and complained. And depending upon what the laws are in the country in question, they might have certain protections so they won't be punished for saying these things, or they may not.
Yeah.
But the real question for us as reporters is what they're saying reliable? Is it true or
Yeah.
not? So sometimes there are people who say they're whistleblowers and honestly don't understand really what happened. They think X happened, but it really wasn't that way. So sometimes they're a hassle for us. Other times they are great stories. And often it's mostly true, but not all true. And so it's usually difficult to deal with as a story.
Yeah. They can
Yeah.
be a hassle for you.
Well, sure, because
Yeah.
you've got to try, and it all depends on what their status is. If they're not willing to be identified, or they're worried about retaliation, it makes it a little difficult to check out their story because it might reveal who they are if you've promised to keep them confidential.
Yeah.
And so it becomes more complicated. I don't recommend this kind of work to people who are looking for a quick, big story and you're going to make headlines.
Yeah.
It's a long process. And the other side of the coin is that people who decide that they're going to risk their job, or they're going to make their bosses unhappy, they might be able to keep their job because there's a law that will protect them, but they're going to take that kind of risk of becoming the one who points the finger. Usually not always, but usually they're in great distress when they're doing that, emotionally and otherwise. And even if they're successful, what they're doing is going to change their lives in some way. Successful in getting the information out.
Yeah.
And so as a reporter, you're taking on somebody usually who's going to take a lot of tending. You know, you're going to have to try to, you're not allowed to give them anything. You're not allowed to financially support them.
You're not allowed to.
No, the rules are we can't give, if you come to me with a story, at least in the US,
Yeah.
I can't give you any money for the story.
No.
If the story means, if you were telling me the story and because of that story you would get evicted from your apartment block or something like that,
Yeah.
I might arrange for a place for you to stay, at least while we're doing the story. But I can't, in a sense, assist you very much. I
Yeah.
can't hire you a lawyer.
So you don't share the risk at all, really?
We share a different risk. When we
Yeah.
publish, then if the story turns out not to be true, or even if the story is true in certain cases with very powerful people and who don't care how much money they spend, we can be sued, we can be attacked, we can be told that we didn't check the story out and here's some information you should have had, and be discredited. That's what we put on the line.
Right.
I mean, many journalists succeed doing other kinds of reporting where they don't take those kinds of risks at all. One of the things I was trying to get to here at the conference, but I never got there because I've got too much, I mentioned it, is trying to develop a way to help people, whistleblowers or sources, in particular stories where the subject of the story, the company or the individual, is so powerful that they could destroy that person by suing them in every jurisdiction, let's say in the United States. So they couldn't afford to defend themselves. And we can't pay for it, right? So what do I do for that person? How can I help them? How can I at least give them a fair chance to survive? That's a real question in itself.
Do you have an answer?
Not yet.
Okay.
But I've been working on it actively because I recently have had a number of experiences with individuals who I thought were credible, who were inside a particular industry, wanted to talk, indicated a lot sort of confidentially about what they would talk about, but without them coming forward publicly and talking about it, I couldn't use it. Because they were talking about conversations they had with people.
You need the proof.
We need the proof, and also, just in fairness, information that's presented publicly without confidential sources has more weight than someone anonymously making the allegation.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm working on that, but I don't know that I'll solve it.
Good luck. How would you compare Obama's treatment of whistleblowers to Bush's?
Well, Obama has done something very unusual. You know, when he ran for president, he said that whistleblowers were courageous and patriotic.
Yeah.
And then he becomes president, and his Justice Department winds up prosecuting people in the national security area for talking to reporters, right? Leaking information, more than all the presidents of the United States combined. And we don't see a very aggressive, let's say, encouragement of whistleblowers in the rest of the government. Recently, there was a big criticism of the Veterans Administration in the U.S. because there were all these problems, and it turned out there were all these people who were coming forward to report it, and they got disciplined and so on. So that's the objective record with Obama. I mean, it's the opposite of, I've noticed that his administration often will do exactly the opposite in many areas of what they say.
Well, he's a PR man, isn't he? Don't you feel?
He's a former law professor.
Yeah.
I think he was in the PR business. He described himself as a community organizer.
Yeah.
And he's a politician.
Yeah. Yeah. Why do you think there's such a big change between before he got elected and after?
Well, he's a politician. I mean, I did meet him a couple of years prior to him running. I mean, officially running.
Yeah.
It was an off-the-record meeting, so I can't really say what was said.
No?
But I could say to you that I afterwards have always said, when people ask me about him, I'd say he's a politician.
Right.
He's not what a lot of people thought. He was different, that he was, idealistic, relatively young, he's African American, et cetera, et cetera. And he's different in certain ways obviously from George Bush. He can talk.
Yeah.
That was a great improvement.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. So, is there any, because you mentioned you're wanting whistleblower protection, but is there any at all?
There is protection, yeah. Under federal law and also in the corporate law, laws that cover corporations, there are various protections for whistleblowers. But as the speaker from Washington who has the Government Accountability Project, they try to get these laws enforced so that people are protected. The problem is that there isn't that much money in it.
Yeah.
So there is a law firm that does a lot of that kind of work. But you would have to have much more aggressive enforcement of those laws and protections for people to feel comfortable. The other side of it, though, even if there were more protections, and this is what I was trying to get at, when you work somewhere for any period of time, you develop loyalties to people who are there. You have a life, right? And to take that life and put it up in the air, even if they can't fire you, to basically throw away your career, and it's a big deal. Yeah. You should watch the movie The Insider.
Yes.
When Al Pacino decides that he's going to, do what he's doing.
Where you're played by Al Pacino.
Yeah. So
do you want to tell us about the experience that inspired? Yeah, we've heard of it.
He's shorter than I am.
Okay. Oh dear.
And he's older.
Oh, is he? Well, tell us about how this film got made, and the experience of it.
Well, the film really was made by Michael Mann, who was the producer and director, and it was written by a guy named Eric Roth, who's a really good writer. I mean, it was unusual, I think, in the sense that it didn't go through the normal sort of Hollywood process. By chance, I happened to know at that time a woman who was the vice president of Touchstone Pictures, in charge of acquisitions of new films, who mentioned to me that they had just signed a 5-picture deal with Michael Mann, and she knew I knew him from the University of Wisconsin in the early 60s, and also in the 1980s I had consulted with him on some movie stuff. So I knew these people, and they knew sort of what I was going through. And then they knew something was going on with me, and then it all became public in the paper. And so I remember Michael Mann called me up and said, for instance, I used to do stories about international arms dealing, weapons, because I had a bunch of arms dealers who I knew, and they would go on camera and we'd fly around, and you could make little movies for 60 minutes about it. And he was interested in that for possible motion picture. We talked about that. But you talk with Hollywood people about movies, it's not going to happen. Like very few movies ever get made. Even when they give you money, I think it's 80 out of 2,000, ever actually get made. So I wasn't really interested in that business. But he called me up and he said, we're talking about this and that. He says, I think maybe the story is you. But at that moment,
He'd heard about the story before? Yeah,
because it was in the New York Times.
Oh, right.
And so he, and then about a month and a half later, a woman, Marie Brenner, who writes for Vanity Fair magazine, asked to talk with me. She actually went to see Mike Wallace at 60 Minutes about this thing and thought he knew Wygant, the whistleblower, the source who we had to go on camera. And Mike had to tell her that he couldn't introduce her to him because he didn't really know him.
Yeah.
Right? So she had to go talk to me. And she got enamored of the story. You know, I introduced her to Wigand, and she wrote an article. And in the way that Hollywood works, what they do is they buy an article or they buy a book to announce to the world, we're making this movie. And so Michael arranged with this woman from Touchstone to buy the article, the rights to the article. Mm. And that's how it started.
So tell us about the actual story.
The actual story?
Yes, how it was in your life.
How it was in my life?
Yeah.
Well, how much tape you got? I was in the middle of a whole thing at CBS that took, from the time that they announced that they were going to make a movie, it took me 8 months to negotiate my way out of CBS. I was under contract with CBS. So I had to go through all of that. And then I spent quite a bit of time talking with Michael and with Eric Roth, who was a screenwriter. Hollywood movies, big Hollywood movies, I think they spent like $70 or $80 million. I learned why they cost so much. But, they did crazy stuff. I mean, really crazy.
They waste a lot.
It looks like waste. I don't know. They wanted to go to one of the odd things is that they wanted to go to Lebanon because just prior to doing it's the opening scene in the film, and they wanted to actually film in Lebanon. Well, of course there was work going on. I mean, it was not possible. They couldn't get insurance to go, so that they actually rented a whole Arab town in Israel to shoot that.
You can rent a town?
I guess so. They rented a house a block away from my house in Berkeley for $30,000, and the people moved out for a month. And I was saying, why not me? So that's what making a movie is like, is watching them do things like that.
So it was shot in Israel, not?
That was in Israel, the opening scene.
Yeah.
And, but for instance, Pacino and most actors don't want, if they're playing someone who's alive, they don't want them on the set.
Yeah, I could.
So he'd come and spend time with me.
Yeah.
But he didn't want me to be there when he played me.
Yeah. Okay. But tell us
about. They
about.
photographed all my clothes.
Yeah.
Yeah. One day I opened the door. They knocked on the door, and there's a bunch of people with cameras, still cameras, and they walked in with Michael, and they just started photographing our house and.
Did they tell you
about it? Opened my doors and were photographing my socks and all kinds of stuff. Wow,
that's quite creepy.
Yeah, it was a little weird.
Did they ask you, can we do this, or it was just?
No, they just sort of walked in, Wow. But they did send me the photos at the end.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, so I have a whole recreation of the inside of like our bedroom and whatnot, and closets and.
So.
From 1998.
So what? But why was there a film made about you then? Do you want to?
Why was the film?
Yes.
Why was it? Well, they thought it was a compelling story. It was big news at the time. Tobacco was a huge issue at that time.
So the story was for the people at home about the tobacco industry.
Well, it's part about the tobacco. It's really about corporate power.
Yeah. So
one's the tobacco industry and the fact that it, as I mentioned, you use their product as directed, it will kill you. That's what it's supposed to do.
Yeah.
That's why they have to recruit young people, because they're losing their customers at the other end.
Yeah.
Right? They have a shorter life expectancy than the average person. In fact, they used that argument in a lawsuit that was brought against various states, got together and sued the tobacco industry because of the health care that they had to pay for of people who were dying from tobacco. People were getting lung cancer, heart disease, so on. So that means the taxpayer has to pay more and more money, especially for poorer people. So the tobacco industry's answer in court was, no, actually the state has to pay less because the people involved live shorter lifespans, so the state has to spend less money on them in old age. And
so
actuarially, apparently that's true.
they're actually doing us a service to
Yeah,
the
right.
economy.
Exactly. So, no, at least to the solvency of governments.
Yeah. Wow. So, but if they're using that argument, then they're admitting that they kill people, or is this the argument that was used
They're
afterwards?
saying, people should smoke in moderation. They had all kinds of different arguments back then about smoking. They've given, after that whole battle, which by 1999, the tobacco industry finally admitted that yes, there are health effects from tobacco. They settled all the lawsuits. They paid 200 and some odd billion to the states for past damages. And so they've taken a different kind of position.
Yeah. So what did Wyman, was it?
Wygant.
Wygant. What did he actually, what did he reveal?
Well, the major factual thing that he revealed, there were two things. One was he was privy to conversations with the CEO, the chief executive of Brown & Williamson Tobacco. He was his chief science advisor. He was the head of research and development. So he could report of his own experience, from his own experience, that yes, we knew that tobacco killed people. Yes, we put additives. They were putting an additive in their pipe tobacco that is sometimes used as a rat poison. They were, that they were using different chemicals. That was one thing. The other thing the major thing that he revealed was it was a document that he was familiar with and had a copy of from inside the company. And at that time, and I don't know what the numbers are today, Marlboro was the biggest selling cigarette in the world, and in the U.S. market as well. So the question to a competitor, Brown & Williamson Tobacco, which was then a division of British American Tobacco, the question was, how come? Is it because of the advertising? What's the difference? In the way they make the cigarette? Why, right?
Yeah.
So British American Tobacco paid for a group of scientists to reverse engineer the Marlboro, break it down. What's in it? See, because maybe you don't understand. Do you smoke?
No.
You're not going to admit it. Okay. Wait, the tobacco that's in a cigarette that you see someone smoking on the street?
Yeah.
Has the same relationship to tobacco leaf as the cocaine somebody is snorting.
Yeah.
Okay, to a cocaine leaf. Okay, doesn't look anything like it, right? I mean, the powder, cocaine powder, doesn't look like a cocaine leaf, right? So in the processing, so the processing of tobacco, what they do is they wash all the chemicals, everything out of the leaf. Okay. They take it all out. Nicotine, everything comes out. All that's left is that vegetable matter. They dry that, and they dice it up and make it into basically, shred it. And then they add the nicotine and other chemicals back into it based on a formula. Each company has its own formula. They learned in the late 1920s, they knew that nicotine was addictive. So they thought, okay, we'll put more nicotine in and add nicotine to each cigarette, right? And that'll get us more smokers, right? Because they'll be more addicted, more quickly. They had one problem.
Yeah.
Nicotine's a heart poison, and it will make your heart stop.
Oh.
Dead. It's used in scientific experiments on animals, for instance, when they want to do heart disease research. They inject nicotine right into the heart, it stops. So in the late 1920s, people were just dying off from smoking Lucky Strikes, for instance. And so then they had to come up with a balanced, what's the right dosage, right, to keep the person alive but addicted. What the reverse engineering of the Marlboro revealed in this document he had was that they were adding ammonia to the cigarettes, just like they add ammonia to a lot of fast food that you eat. And that caused, in this case, it caused the nicotine to be more directly absorbed into the bloodstream.
We've got one Twitter question.
Okay.
It is for the young people watching this at home. What should they do to combat these abuses of power by corporations and states?
Read.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Read.
I agree with that.
Read as much as you can about if it's a company or a government that's doing something that you're not happy with. Read as much about it as you can.
Yeah.
And ask questions.
Yeah.